Every time we write about an electric car on Car Advice, it seems like the whole world, or most of the internet anyway, jumps on board to tell us what they really think. Along with the environment, people are worried about range. They're scared the car's going to go dead like their phone goes dead on a night out. So, is range anxiety really a thing people need to worry about in the real world on their real commutes? We're going to use the BMW i3s to find out. So on paper, the i3 has a range of about 200 k's in the real world, and I drive a 40-kilometre round trip every day. To put that range to the test, I'm going to drive home tonight on Monday night and just commute normally for a week. Best case scenario, we don't touch the plug and this is a great little city car. Worst case, we're trapped in a red and black BMW on the side of Punt Road in peak hour. Anyway, time to get this started, so wish me luck. So here we are in the BMW i3s. Now, I didn't say this in my introduction, and I definitely didn't say it in the email I sent to Mike Stevens, aka my boss, when he suggested this idea. I'm really quite nervous about it. As with petrol cars and their fuel efficiency claims, often electric cars don't actually go as far in the real world as manufacturers say they will. That's why the new European drive cycle quotes 300 k's for the i3s, and BMW says you'd probably get closer to 200. So already on paper, the claimed range isn't necessarily the range you're going to enjoy in ideal conditions in the real world. Now, this is set up well to get me where I need to go. It's got a 94 amp hour battery, which is bigger than what you got in the first i3, and it's a smarter battery. It's the same physical size as the battery in the first car, but you've got a whole lot more cells in there for a whole lot more range. I'm also in Eco Pro mode at the moment, which means that I've got a softer throttle and some other stuff set up that basically means I'm less likely to put my foot to the floor and burn through a ton of charge in one go. All told, I'm just worried that I'm going to be that guy who runs out of battery charge in a bright red and black BMW on the side of Punt Road in peak hour traffic in Melbourne and has to have the entire angry commuting world drive past and look at some bloke with 2 GoPros on the dash sitting there sheepish. I'd rather not be that guy, but that is a risk we take here. Anyway, we're going to try and keep you guys updated on what's going on pretty much daily. So I'm going to finish this drive home tonight and then jump in tomorrow morning and update you on the range and what's planned for the day. Stay tuned, obviously, and please put your hands together and hope that I make it to the end of this week commuting, because I'm very nervous. All right, here we are, Tuesday morning, sitting in traffic on Punt Road. Get excited about that, folks. Now, you'll notice I've changed my jumper and shirt. This is a week-long challenge, and continuity can go and take a hike, because I don't want to smell terrible all week. So we started this morning with 195 kilometers of range showing on the little range meter in the i3's dashboard. That is down 5 kilometers on what we finished with last night, even though I didn't do any driving last night. So I'm not quite sure how that works. I've never jumped in a petrol car and, having not driven it, had less petrol than when I started. Anyway, that kind of makes me distrustful of that range meter, but we're still kind of ahead of par, so that's all good news. Beyond that, we're going to be spending a lot of time in the interior of this i3 because we're going to be spending a lot of time in traffic. So it's worth taking a look at how it's actually laid out, as that rubbish truck next to me makes a whole lot of noise. To start with, there's a whole lot of normal BMW stuff here, and that's a really good thing because normal BMW is very good. You've got a 10.2-inch iDrive display, and along with the normal rotary controller down on the console here, and then this little screen that pops up on the dashboard. Although it looks really funky, it's got all the same information you would expect of a normal BM, and a really handy display to show you your regenerative braking, how much power you're using, and what drive mode you're in. So all of that, really good stuff. Beyond the iDrive stuff, I think the most interesting thing about this interior is some of the materials that have been used. BMW wants this car to be eco-friendly from the moment it starts being built to the moment it hits the road. And that means that they've used stuff like door panels and dash panels with 25% recycled fibres. And they're designed to make them more eco-friendly and have a smaller environmental footprint. The leather on these seats, which are also manually adjusted because apparently electric motors would have been too heavy, was dyed using olive leaf extract, and little things like that sound small but add up over time. The dash itself has a beautiful massive piece of open pore wood. It sort of starts up high and then sweeps down low under the driver display and pops up the other side. You can actually get that in pale wood, and it looks fantastic like that as well. But it's just that little bit different to what you would normally expect. And speaking of different, we've got this gear selector here, which looks a bit like a transformer's leg. It's very, very funky, but BMW didn't need to put anything on the transmission tunnel because there is no transmission tunnel. This is an electric car. So they've moved it up here behind the steering wheel. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, well, it's just completely normal. The final funky thing about the interior is the fact that the rear doors are suicide doors. And that looks really cool. We'll show you those now. But it also causes a few problems. For one, if I want to let someone out of the back seat and I'm sitting in the front, I can't just let them open their rear door. I've got to open my door. And that means opening this pillar. And that means my seatbelt gets pulled out the door and I go with it. Small thing, but just worth bearing in mind. The other thing worth bearing in mind is that this is a 4-seat car, not a 5-seater. So you're not looking at a particularly practical thing, although it does have really good headroom and decent rear leg room. Although again, I'm not going to be able to sit behind myself. All told, it's a really interesting execution, and BMW's done a good job of blending the interesting stuff with the really boring stuff in a way that makes this work well. So good job, BM. Anyway, we'll check back in on the range when we get to work today, and then we'll jump back on tomorrow morning and we'll take a look at the performance of the car. Hello and welcome to the i3 again. It's Wednesday night now. I did some video this morning and it looked terrible, so having another crack at this. It turns out this video log thing is a little harder than it looks. Anyway, we've done about 80 kilometers of driving, about 85 in the i3 now. So we've got a kind of good idea about what its actual claimed range is versus what we're using. And it turns out BMW is pretty close. Right now, sitting on Punt Road on the way home from work, I've got 110 kilometers left. Today we're going to talk about what makes the i3s an i3s and not a regular i3. And that starts with the motors that are underneath. So the normal i3's got 125 kilowatts and 250 newton meters of torque. The i3s bumps it up to 135 kilowatts and 270 newton meters. Small increases, but handy nonetheless. You also sit 10 millimeters lower on new suspension, you ride on 20-inch wheels, and you get some funky styling stuff on the exterior. You also get wider tires. The standard i3 rides on 155 section fronts and 175 section rears. They go up to 175 section fronts and 195 section rears, so still incredibly skinny. It's unbelievable how small they are, but wider than before for a more stable feel. And based on a quick drive in the original i3 and driving this one, this car definitely feels that little bit more planted and less kind of up in the air like a spaceship that you got in that first i3. In terms of performance, it's really punchy off the line. 0 to 60 k's an hour takes just 3.4 seconds. And that's an odd metric, I realize, but it's a really relevant one if you're living in the city and you want to burn stuff off the line. 0 to 100 takes 6.9 seconds. So again, that's Mark 5 Golf GTI quick. This is not a slow car. All told, it's a pretty punchy, interesting take on the basic i3 formula. And it's not a proper hot hatch, nor is it a warm hatch, but it definitely is a more purposeful feeling, punchier i3, especially when you flick it into sport mode, which is unique to this car. Now tomorrow we're going to have a chat about what makes the i3 an i3, what makes it an electric car. That means regenerative braking, there's no noise, no creep, etc, etc, etc. So stay tuned for that. Hello and welcome to the i3s for a Thursday morning update. We've got one morning to go, that's tomorrow, and we're looking like we're going to make it with plenty of battery left at this point. We've got 88 k's of range left to do about 70 kilometers of driving. So although BMW's range claim wasn't quite bang on, we've driven more than 110 kilometers now, and we've used about 125 k's of range. It's been very, very close to bang on, and certainly closer than I would have expected, which is great because it hasn't left me stranded on the side of the road. Also a little disappointed for you maybe because it hasn't left me stranded on the side of the road. Anyway, now today we're going to talk about what makes an electric car to drive, and the first part of that is the silence. It's really quiet in here, as you can probably tell. There's also no vibrations through the steering wheel from a motor. It's just a really serene place to be, and that's lovely. The second part is regenerative braking. So if I lift off the accelerator in a normal car or an internal combustion car, the car sort of coasts in gear and then you push your foot on the brake and it'll slow down. That's all pretty simple. In an electric car, it doesn't quite work that way because that's quite a wasteful way of doing things. You burn all this petrol and this energy getting up to speed, and then you kind of just turn it into heat and dust when you slow down and brake like that. So in an electric car, when you lift off the accelerator, the motor turns into a kind of dynamo and starts pulling, or they call it harvesting, energy back to the battery. The idea being you get as much range as possible by trying to get some sort of charge back to the battery when you lift off the accelerator. What that means for the driver is that when you lift off the accelerator, the car doesn't coast normally. So rather than just following the traffic in front, you kind of pull back and get out of sync with them to start with. But you can actually drive with one pedal. Only when you're coming to a full stop in a bit of a hurry have I touched the brake pedal in this i3. Otherwise, you just sort of slow down by working out how much pressure you need on the accelerator. The final way is definitely the most fun way though, and that's instant torque. That's the biggest difference between driving a petrol car off the line and driving an electric car off the line. When you put your foot down in this i3, even though it's not the most powerful car in the world, it really hauls. You're able to burn off essentially anything you want to next to you, unless they're really trying or they're really quick. I got rid of a Golf GTI pretty comfortably this morning when I had to. So just because electric motors make their torque from 0 revs, if you're stuck in traffic and you need to get rid of somebody or you're next to somebody, there's no gearbox and no gear change and no revs to worry about. You just put your foot down and the torque is there straight away. It's very, very satisfying. Now, the final part of this challenge is going to come tomorrow morning. We're going to see how much range we've used in total. We're also going to go through and have a look at, what BMW does to extend range on its cars. Because if you do get yourself in a pickle, there's a couple of modes in this EV that are designed to make sure you get absolute maximum range out of the car and to make sure you don't get stranded. So stay tuned for that and keep your fingers crossed nothing goes wrong and we don't get stranded on the side of the road. Hello and welcome to installment 5 of the Range Anxiety Diaries, where we come to a conclusion about whether range anxiety is a real thing. The answer, I'm going to talk about at a bit of length, but realistically, is no. BMW said you'd get 200 kilometers out of this car on a full charge, and I wanted to commute 160 kilometers in a week. I've done 150 of that 160, and I've still got tons of range left. So BMW's claimed figure, that real world number they give you, not the new European drive cycle figure, which is complete pie in the sky rubbish, is bang on pretty much. And that's boring for a video because the bastards don't give us anything mean to say about their car. But it's also reassuring. If I owned this car and say I didn't want to charge it during the week or I didn't have access to a plug for a few days, I'd still be completely fine. On that front, for the average city commuter doing an average commute every day, the i3 has absolutely nailed the brief. Now, one of the other things I've learnt out of this is that the i3 is a really good city car. It's just way too expensive. So, as tested here, you're looking at about $70,000 plus for the i3s. That's too much money for a small car. I completely accept that. But if you can look past the price tag, it's a really nice city car. I am so comfortable in here. The seats are brilliant. It's dead quiet and cosseting around town. It's just a good place to spend time. Instant torque is awesome in the city. Regenerative braking is awesome in the city. I've been driving with one pedal. I jumped back in an internal combustion car last night for the first time all week, and I lifted off the accelerator expecting the car to coast, to pull back, and it coasted. I almost ran into the car in front. It's amazing how quickly you adjust to that stuff. Or maybe I'm just a bad driver. The car also has been really well received by people who've sat in it and people who've seen it in traffic. I was expecting it to make me look like a wanker, and well, I still look like a wanker, but that's not the car. People are interested in what it is, they're interested in what it stands for, and especially when you tell them that it's got a carbon fiber chassis and it's got recycled materials and it's got electric motors and a floating screen and all that stuff, they're completely on board with it. And that's really cool as well, because it shows that BMW with its i brand kind of set out to make electric cars interesting and to put the technology on the map, and it's done that. People are fascinated by this thing, and I'm fascinated by it as well. I'd love to live with one for longer to see what it's like. All told, that's not the really scathing conclusion we were after, potentially. It's not, you'll never be able to drive an electric car. And I look forward to the commenters coming on board and just saying, you haven't been hard enough on it. What are you talking about? You're an idiot. Your hair looks shit. Your shirt's terrible. Fine, fire away. But in this test, in a normal commuting challenge where the i3 could very well have fallen down, it's been totally fine. Well done, BMW.